So I'm starting recording to the cloud. The other thing that we wanted to talk about is that if we ask questions in the chat, those will not necessarily be shared. So you should be okay to ask questions there. You will want to ask that privately to Maria Gutierrez if you don't want everyone else in the conversation or in the meeting to be able to see what you're asking. Also, if you know Ms. Gutierrez, you can email her questions as well, but we probably will not get to those in the course of the training. I know that some people have already emailed her questions and she did share those in the chat, and we will be answering those at the end of the presentation. And the time at the end with the questions, we will leave quite a bit of time, so please do not worry about asking questions right away. Just make a note to yourself or put it in the chat box so that you don't forget, which is something that I do. So be sure to just jot it down. I've also asked that everyone fill out this online questionnaire. We will have you do this before the presentation and after the presentation. So thank you so much if you have already filled that out. We so appreciate you. And if you would like to go now, I'm going to share the links again in the chat box. So everyone should be able to see those. We have the questionnaire in Spanish, English, and Korean. The reason that we do these questionnaires is we want to make sure that you are getting the most out of the training, that you are learning, that you are growing. And so we are asking you to fill these out before and after to see if you have learned anything new. Hopefully you do. And that will help us when we are going to the Alabama Council on Developmental Disabilities, who provided us this funding. It'll help us to say, look, 17 people came to this training and they all learned something. This will be really helpful for us and also to get more funding for things like this in the future. So quickly, I am Dr. Christine Drew. I am an assistant professor at Auburn University, and I teach special education coursework for graduate students. I work with Dr. Doris Hill and Maria Gutierrez on the ACDD grant, and I appreciate them so much. And so, Dr. Hill, if you want to do an introduction. Oh, you are muted, but you maybe are doing something right now. Sorry. So Maria, do you mind doing your introduction?
Buenos días a todos. Good morning, everybody. My name is Maria Gutierrez, and I am the Family Navigator for the Region Number 4. And I'm just so happy to see so many new families and some old faces. And so I hope that you guys could get a lot of information from today's presentation.
And I think Dr. Hill might still be working on some logistics for us.
Yeah, no, I'm here now. I'm Doris Hill. One of our interpreters is working her way in right now. So I'm Doris Hill. I'm director of the Regional Autism Network, and I'm a associate research faculty at Auburn. I'm excited to be here, and we're excited to have Wendy Dean here speaking, as I said, and Maria Sahanic is one of our interpreters. You may have already said that, but I was on mute. So I'm going to mute myself now again. And
yes, and our presenter today is Wendy Dean, and I will go to the next slide and let her introduce herself. Thank you so much, Ms. Wendy, for being here today.
Sure. Thank you guys for having me. I am Wendy Dean. I'm Senior Case Advocate with ADAP, Alabama Disabilities Advocacy Program. And for those of you who don't know, ADAP is a federally funded agency. We are also federally mandated to exist. We're a law firm, and the only law that we practice is disability related. And we cover the entire state of Alabama. So, and I'm just going to jump right in. Is that okay, Dr. Drew? Okay, fantastic. So all children who have an IEP or a 504 plan are entitled to a free, appropriate public education. And as a result of the pandemic, there was no change in that. There were changes that happened for our children across the state and across the country, but the law did not change. The children are still in, IDEA did not change. Children are still entitled to a free, appropriate public education. And many of them, you can go ahead and change, many of our children did not receive that as a result of the pandemic. Some of them were educated at home and not receiving services. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. The federal government said that the U.S. Department of Education said that COVID impact services have to be addressed for all students with an IEP or a 504 plan who were adversely impacted as a result of the pandemic. And so what they decided was at the annual IEP meeting that has to be addressed. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So we've been suggesting that parents keep track of what services were missed. I know for some students, there may have been a student who was supposed to be receiving occupational therapy services. Well, when schools went remote, and an occupational therapist could not go into the classroom or into the homes where the children were, sometimes they weren't getting those services. Now, the State Department is saying that these COVID-19 services are not as a result of the school having done anything wrong. So it's not that parents have to prove that in most cases, whereas in most cases they have to prove the school did something wrong. They do not have to prove the school did something wrong, just that their child missed out on not just services, but education. And so what that might look like is your child was sitting in front of a computer and there was a teacher on the other end, and they were to be learning remotely, but it just wasn't happening for them. They couldn't pay attention. There wasn't that direct support that was provided them. So, and I may be just preaching to the choir saying what could have gone wrong, because parents know what could go wrong, because much of that did go wrong. But what the goal is to get your child, the student, where they would have been had they not missed out on educational services. And so they have offered these COVID-19 services. This is different from what we typically refer to as compensatory services, but it is a compensation for what the child did not get. The goal is to guard against learning loss, but the learning loss has already happened. Whereas with compensatory, much of the time, let's just move on. I will go into that a little bit deeper in a moment. It is compensatory services, but it's being offered by the school as opposed to you one having to fight for it, sort of, because you are going to have to document. Okay, let's move to the next one. It's very, very interesting how this all works. So what the first step is looking at the IEP. One, determine what was not provided. That's an easy way to look at this. What was not given to your child? What service did they not receive? That's easy. We can say, my child did not get speech therapy at all for 3 months or for however long it is. That's very simple. It's either they got it or they didn't get it. So that would be your first place of looking from my perspective, is what services in that IEP were they to get that they didn't get. But then the next thing, and it gets a little more tricky, is looking at what they did get, but how they were not able to utilize that to receive an appropriate education. And what I mean by that is, once again, that student who was sitting in front of a computer screen and a teacher was teaching either to them directly or to a classroom, and they just could not understand, or I'm trying to find my word, but just they could not grasp what was being taught because they were not in that classroom or not receiving that one-on-one instruction or whatever it is that's in their IEP. And you want to look back from the beginning of the pandemic when all of this happened up until now. And so, okay, let's go ahead and move to the next one. So goals being addressed. Have any of your child's IEP or 504 goals been put aside or not addressed, especially if the child is learning remotely? That we kind of talked about, but it goes deeper than that also. You want to look, some of the documents that I suggest that parents get when they're looking at COVID-19 impact services and having a COVID impact review. And I didn't talk about that. Let's talk about that. So at your child's annual IEP meeting, the school should be addressing or should be doing a COVID impact review. If that is not brought up, you should be bringing that up if you feel like that there is an issue that is a result of the services that they did not receive. This is so difficult with not having feedback when I'm talking, just so you guys know, just talking at people. So getting back on track now, if in fact you have an IEP meeting coming up, or you just want to go ahead and look at what services may be provided as a result of the pandemic for your child, you can actually request an impact review, COVID-19 impact review. You would do that to your school's special education coordinator. I typically suggest that you do that via email and copy the principal on that. Have your documentation ready to say, you know, what it is that you feel like that your child missed as a result of the pandemic. We can go ahead and move to the next. So this says, even if your child attends school remotely, the school is still responsible for providing services. And that is true. If your child went back and was having has had a difficult time catching up because of what they missed, that still matters. So no matter where they are, those impact services need to be addressed, no matter where they're learning. If your child needs extra support to access remote learning, this should be reflected in the IEP. This should always be reflected in the IEP, though, regardless of the COVID services, the impact services. We can go to the next. Okay, so for children in remote learning positions whereby they're at home, there may be other support that they need that they did not need in the classroom. Those need to be looked at, those needs should be looked at when looking at these COVID-19 impact services. This is not going to be just a place that everyone is to go. And this is not like summer school. I don't know how each school district is planning to do these, but the COVID-19 impact services that are provided to a child should still be individualized, just like the individualized education program. It's exactly the same, except for it is addressed just with what the child missed as an impact of those services. I'm sorry, I have a dog. We can go to the next one. Okay, we talked about the compensatory services, compensatory education, but I'm going to read this. This is all coming from OSEP. This is the feds that are saying what these services should look like for children who were adversely affected by school closures and remote learning. So the State Department of Education did not do a training, but did put out a letter and that addresses all of this to school systems. I know many of them aren't even aware yet of the COVID-19 service provision, but you guys can be asking for this review and should be asking for this review if you feel like your child was negatively impacted as a result of the pandemic. We can go to the next. And again, this is to, I get ahead of myself. These services are to put the student in a place that they would have been had the pandemic not happened. So in that 1920 IEP that your child had, when schools closed in March, there were only a couple of months left of school. Where was your child then? What did those annual goal progress reports look like? Did they say that your child was making progress toward reaching their goals and then things stopped and they didn't reach those goals? And then we moved to the next year and wrote a new IEP. Sometimes that is what I see has happened with calls that I get in our office. We just kind of forgot about that and moved on to the next school year. But these services are available to your child so that they can get where they would have been had the pandemic never happened. That's the goal of these. Okay, we can move to the next. When I say these, I mean those services. You see here, these services should be addressed sooner rather than later, and especially for students who are exiting high school next year. If your child, or this year, I'm sorry, this year or next year, but this year, some students are going to be graduating in June or May, whenever those ceremonies are, and they may have still not gotten what they needed. And so even though they're graduating, they can still get these COVID-19 impact services to get them caught up to where they would be otherwise if the pandemic hadn't happened. Okay, we can move on. So those need to be addressed immediately. You can send that email to the special ed coordinator that I discussed, copy the principal, ask for a COVID-19 impact review for your child. And you can call our office and we can help you with that if you need assistance. So these are some of the things to think about. Is your child able to do the schoolwork provided to him or her? Is your child struggling to learn? Is your child losing skills? And that's a big one, losing skills. Oh gosh, okay, so with typical compensatory services, that's how it's done, is you have to say, one has to be able to prove that there was a loss or that regression, that they have regressed and they will not be able to get back where they need to be at the beginning of the school year in a reasonable period of time. That is not discussed in these impact services. What is at issue with the COVID-19 impact services and within the review is what your child, either the services they did not get or that loss that where they've just not been able to get back where they need to be. But you don't have to prove that regression and that they would not be able to catch up by next school year because they've already had the loss. We can move to the next. When a child can no longer complete activities or exhibit skills they once had, skill loss has occurred. Skill loss can be displayed in decreased adaptive, social, behavioral, and academic abilities. So also if your child has a behavior intervention plan and there have been behavior issues that have not been addressed, that can be addressed in your COVID-19 impact services as well. So for those of you, for those parents who have children who have a BCBA working with them or are receiving ABA services some other way in the schools, that still is at issue, should still be addressed if it is at issue, rather. We can go to the next. Okay. So what causes missed services? Student focused. So an example of student focused would be the nature of the student's disability made engaging remotely difficult or impossible. And we talked about that. If they can't sit in front of a computer screen and watch. And with these services, the way that it's coming down from the State Department is like it's a no blame. And that makes sense with getting the services, that we don't have to put blame anywhere, that these services are due regardless of fault or no fault. Then IEP focused, lack of sufficient, an example would be a lack of sufficient personnel to meet the service needs. When the pandemic began, there were, and throughout this, there have been people who have not been well. And so there have been teachers who may not have been able to be there, or aides who could not who were not available. So if there was not personnel to provide services to your child, then that would be a cause for missed services. Another example is an inability to evaluate or reevaluate within the timelines. We saw a great deal of this at the beginning of the pandemic. This was one of the largest issues, I would say. Initially, we had parents who had requested that their child be evaluated at the beginning or just before the beginning of the pandemic, and then they were put off for a great deal of time. I am not aware of any parents who still are being put off, but I imagine that they're out there, or children not being evaluated. And so if you know anybody, please send them our way. Let me help them, or help them as best you can to go ahead and make those requests again. That timeline of 60 days to evaluate a child is still in place, and was still in place even when the pandemic was at its height. That should be addressed always. Okay, let's move on to the next. Okay, blanket rules for compensatory education should not be used. Some students with disabilities might be on track while others are not. And so it can't be that someone is saying, well, look, these children were sitting in front of the computer and they have an IEP and they were able to do fine. All of this is still individualized. It's always individualized for your child, or should always be individualized. So in saying that, I would be remiss if I did not say summer school is not COVID-19 impact services. Now, it could be that children with IEPs go to the school in the summer to receive their individualized services just as they do during the school year. It could also be that these impact services are provided in the summer, into next year, at the end of this year. There is nothing to say when or where service provision is, except for that IEP team. That's an IEP team decision. So we can move to the next. So this is great. So this is examples of data that can be used to inform COVID-19 impact reviews. So observations, that would include parental observations. You guys were home with your kids. So you're already the #1 experts in your children, but you got to see firsthand what was going on with them, what they were receiving, what they were not receiving, how they learned, how instruction was, what they were capable of completing. I know for some students, they were just given a packet at the end of the school year, and those packets weren't even turned in or graded, or things happened in a lot of different ways. And so you guys were home watching what was happening. So your observations matter. Document those things, and if you didn't document, go back and try to document now what you remember happening at the time. Behavior logs can be used, and those include behavior logs from parents while your children were home. Screenings and assessments, you can gather that information. You have a right to your child's education records. under IDEA, but also under, I'm sorry, acronyms. You have a right to those under the law that provides for an IEP, which is Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. You also have a right to those under Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, as well as Section 504 of the Rehab Act. So you have a right to your child's records, so you can get the results of screenings and assessments. Progress reports. When I'm talking about progress reports, I don't mean the progress report that comes between that says your child has an A or a C or whatever it is. I mean those annual goal progress reports that are addressed in the IEP. In your child's IEP, it says annual goal progress reports will be provided and then it has a line for the IEP team to write in how often. Typically that's every 9 weeks. You have a right to those. Gather those things before you, if at all possible, before you go into that COVID-19 impact review. Mastery of IEP goals and benchmarks can be used also. And then any documentation that you have that you feel like is important to share with the IEP team. I always tell parents to put things in writing. If you're going to have an IEP meeting, it's not a bad idea then to email a special ed coordinator to say, these are the things that we want to discuss in this meeting, just so you're keeping yourself in order and you have a record of that. We can move to the next. Parental input is key in determining if COVID-19 impact services are necessary for FAPE, how much service time is needed, and how services will be delivered. You guys, again, we're home with your kids and it matters. If you have issues, I cannot stress enough, please call our office. And I'm certain that you'll get our contact information at the end of this. But we can help you, and our services are free to families. So we're here for you if you need assistance in navigating all of this, but we can go to the next. And there we go. So documentation is key. Let us help you. Talk to us about what's going on with your child. And I know that this is a very brief amount of information about this, but I feel like it's just like going into an IEP meeting. That's when the work begins. Well, preparation begins before then, but you really know how it's going to go when you get into that IEP meeting. Please also recall that you can have an IEP meeting at any time you ask for it. And so if you disagree with what is going on, what has happened, you can go back into an IEP meeting. But if you ask for something and the school does not provide that, please ask for prior written notice. And prior written notice is going to come to you on a form titled Notice of Proposal or Refusal to Take Action. Prior written notice is what the school has to provide you if they are proposing an action for your child. For example, to provide speech therapy. If the school is proposing speech therapy, then they have to provide you with what's referred to in the law as prior written notice. Also, if the school is refusing an action, if you ask for speech therapy and the school says no, they have to provide you with prior written notice. Again, that comes on a form titled Notice of Proposal or Refusal to Take Action. And that is your first step in determining what sort of conflict resolution, if they are refusing an action, that you would, what avenue you would choose with regard to conflict resolution. Okay.
Thank you so much, Miss Wendy Dean. We appreciate your time. I know that Maria has some questions in the chat that she may be wanting to read out. Or Maria, do you want me to do that?
I could read them to you guys. Okay, we have lots of questions that people have been sending privately or putting them on the chat. Okay, so the first question is, what is exactly data collection? What does exactly data collection look like? Because the one that I have received is just a checklist. It does not show the progress of my son's IEP goals.
Okay, so there is no one way to answer that. Data collection can be, I think it's important that the IEP team determine what data collection is. And so if you're just getting a list, that's not collecting data. And that would be something that I would like to talk one-on-one about, to have more information about what in particular. That's virtually impossible to answer without knowing exactly what the situation is. But the IEP team can determine what data collection is and can address that specifically in the IEP, how they're going to collect data, what data will be provided. I always like data collection checked because I think that's teacher observation. I mean, while it's okay, collecting data, knowing exactly where your child is in reaching that particular goal is important. But if they're just giving you a checklist, it's not good. For that person, if we could talk about that, if you want to call my office and schedule an appointment, I'd love to talk about that with you.
Thank you. The following question is, my son has some behaviors that impedes his learning, but the school said he's not qualified for a behavioral intervention plan. I do not know why. What should I do?
That's a great question. So there is no qualifying for a behavior intervention plan. There's nothing there is qualifying for an IEP. Now, some of my questions would be, is it checked on the IEP that your child has behavior that impacts his learning or the learning of others? But what you should do is formally, and by formally, I just mean via email, request a functional behavioral assessment. You would make that request to the special education coordinator. Go ahead and copy the principal on that email and just say what your concerns are in that email and request a functional behavioral assessment by someone qualified to make recommendations for a behavior intervention plan.
Okay, thank you. Now, the following is, I do not know what to do. I mean, there were things that were said on the IEP meeting that they are not written on the IEP document. How should I address this? If I did not consent and the school is not doing the changes that I suggested.
Okay. So there is a section in the IEP, in your child's IEP, that's concerns of the parent. I'm not sure whether you're saying that the IEP team agreed on certain things that didn't go in the IEP, or if you wanted things in the IEP that the team did not put in. But if you've asked for something, again, you should be receiving prior written notice if they're denying that. And again, I would put my requests in writing, and I would do that by saying, I'd like to have another IEP meeting whereby we discuss these things, that are my concerns.
Thank you. The following questions. Where can we find information about curriculum-based assessments as a type for assessment that the school will use to measure annual goals? And can you give some examples?
Okay, that's a great question. And assessments are not my area of expertise. My colleague, Christina Norris, is much more up on those things. But I can find the answer and answers to that. Now, I mean, there are, and it also depends on age groups, what assessments, statewide assessments are done. Because they're different for different age groups, but I can get that to you, Maria.
Okay, perfect. And I'll be happy to share with the attendees. The next question is, I tried to let the school know that during COVID, my child regressed in areas like learning her name, and transition had become more complicated. I collected data at home, and when I presented it to the school, they told me my data was not relevant. What should I do?
So again, I say put everything in writing. Email that information to your district special education coordinator, who should be addressing, who is ultimately responsible for that being addressed. Your concerns should always be taken into consideration as parent. You are an integral part of that IEP meeting. And so doing just what you did just now, but in writing to a special education coordinator, copying the principal to say, I don't feel like my concerns are being addressed in the IEP meeting. That's serious.
Thank you. My child, the following, my child didn't really meet any of his goals during COVID, but the school has created new IEP goals. And when I asked about the old IEP goals, they told me it was not necessary to work on them anymore. Any recommendations for this parent?
Can you repeat that?
Yes. My child didn't meet any of his IEP goals during COVID, but the school has created new ones, new goals. And when I asked about the old IEP goals, they told me it was not necessary to work on them anymore.
Okay. COVID-19 review. That's where that's going to get addressed. And I would do as much documentation prior to that meeting as possible, but go ahead and ask for a COVID-19 impact review.
Thank you. The following question. During COVID, the IEP team sent math work for my child that it was not appropriate for him as he has an ID, and I suggested to work on functional goals instead. But the school gave him zeros in math because he didn't turn in any homework. How can I address this?
COVID-19 impact review. That's classic for this impact review. That's
okay. Thank you. The following question, the school told me there is only one occupational therapist in the district, so that they could not provide the therapy, and they asked me to do it for my son. Is this okay? I am not an OT and I don't know how to do it.
Okay, so so that is a denial of that's a denial of services. And I'm not certain if that's something that you're saying is continuing now, but that certainly should be addressed. The school not having, according to IDEA, the law that provides for your child's IEP, the school not having enough money or not having the resources, those can never be reasons for not providing services to your child. They can never say, we can't do it because we don't have the money. We can't do it because we don't have the people. They have to find the people. That's what has to happen. And so that needs to be addressed. That needs to be addressed, period. That would be one that I would suggest some advocacy assistance possibly, but sending an email to the special education coordinator. If someone isn't putting something in writing to you, when they've told you something, put it back in writing to them. And when I say in writing, I mean via email. Put it back in writing to them to say, this is what you said to me. This is what I understood. This is what I want. This is how I think we should resolve it. And then kind of see where it goes from there. But if they won't put it, if they haven't put something in writing to you, you can put it back in writing to them, but they can't use not having somebody as a reason. Go ahead, I'm ready for the next one.
Thank you. I believe you already answered this one, but I'm going to present it anyways. When you were talking about assessments, can you give some examples and what are they for? So I think that you said that you will send us information about that, right?
Right, and assessments to which I was referring would be like those state assessments, but then also any, like if your child has been reevaluated, any of those assessments also, and you can find those on the eligibility report, the results of those on your child's eligibility report. When I speak with a parent, I always say, get me a copy of the current IEP, the eligibility report. If there's a functional behavioral assessment, I want a copy of it. The behavior intervention plan, annual goal progress reports. I want to see all of that documentation so I can kind of see where things are. And it's good for parents to keep those records, but it's also great to know what each and everything is that you're looking for. Seek education. Reach out to APEC for parent training. Come to us for advocacy assistance. I go through IEPs with parents a great deal of the time so that they can understand what each of those lines is, because every line on the IEP matters. It's important. That's a very important document for your child. Okay, I'm sorry.
Thank you. The following one is, can I ask a copy of the data from the school, the one that they collect in regards of my son's IEP goals? And if they give it to me, who should explain it?
That's a really great question. Yes, you can get that data. It's a part of your child's education records, and you have a right to that. And there is always, if you look on the meeting notice that you get before a meeting, that particular form always has checked who is being invited by the school to the IEP team meeting. And there's always on there someone who can interpret the data. And when you're in those IEP meetings, we can't always remember everything, but sometimes it's a good idea to say, okay, I understand you're Mr. Jones and you're the math teacher, but what's your position in this meeting? Because we also have Miss Thomas, who is the reading teacher. And so do we really need 2 gen ed teachers, or are these things really important? You know, and who's here to interpret the data? Who's going to make those money decisions? And just FYI, that's the LEA representative. The local education agency representative is the person who says, yes, we're going to hire another occupational therapist so that your child receives that service.
Thank you. The following question is, the school denied to address transition IEP goals for my son due to COVID. What should I do?
Okay. The school denied
to address transition IEP goals.
Okay.
During COVID. So what should the parent do?
Okay. So those could be addressed in the COVID-19 impact services, but you know, this is the simple answer. And of course, all of this is individualized. And so that service may be that your child was going to go out into the community, but still, as when they're able for those services to be made up, and it's not like 1 for 1 either, you know, like this is what they were supposed to get, so they should get this. It could be they don't require as much now because they're back in school, or it could be that they require more because they miss so much. It's individual. It's, you know, every single child, every single person is different. So it's hard to say about that 1-to-1, but address that. The simple answer is address that in the COVID-19 impact review.
Thank you. The next question, if I wanted the school district to invite vocational rehabilitation, but they told me it was not necessary until my child reaches 11th grade, but I feel it's more appropriate to have them involved earlier as his needs are more severe. What should I do?
Request that from the special education coordinator. It doesn't hurt also to, and if your child is of transition age, that transition person should be invited to the IEP meeting, but make a formal request that the school invite them via email to the special ed coordinator, copying the principal. And you can also reach out to VR yourself to that transition representative in your area and give them a heads up, or send them an, you know, call them or send them an email and say, you know, I want you coming to my kid's IEP meeting. And if there are issues there whereby that doesn't happen, call my office.
Thank you. Another question, can I record the IEP meeting with the school not getting upset at me?
I have no idea about somebody getting upset. Maybe, I guess in some school districts you can do it without the school getting upset. I am not an attorney. I'm senior case advocate with ADAP, but I do know that in the state of Alabama, you can record a conversation that you are a party to without another party knowing. Like, we all know that this is being recorded, but because we're having a discussion, Maria could have recorded this and not let me know, because she is a party to this conversation in the state of Alabama. So if you be cautious, if you record the school is going to record, and that becomes a part of your child's school records. And while folks who work for school systems sometimes say some things that they should not have said, so do we as parents. And we don't necessarily want something that we shouldn't have said being in our child's school records. So if they're recording because they're aware you're recording, just be mindful.
Thank you. Now, the next question. If the school provided material and instructions for us to work at home on therapy like OT, ABA, and PT and speech, can I still request compensatory services?
I'm not quite sure I understand. Was the child receiving?
I guess they send instructions of how the parent could provide these kind of interventions. Can the parent request?
Yes, you still get those. You can still ask for this because you're not qualified. No offense, but I'm not qualified to provide occupational therapy to anyone. I'm not an occupational therapist, and I do respect that education and training that they've received to be able to do that. Now, I do think they can teach that an occupational therapist can teach an individual to do things in the interim to help, but yes, COVID-19 service, impact service review.
Thank you. The following question. I have a child that just got an IEP. Okay, so he just is new into the district, and so he just had his first IEP. Can I still request services during the summer, or is this only for the students that had an IEP prior to COVID and there was no progress? The special ed coordinator told me that they only could work with the school calendar from their county.
Right. Okay. So legally, the school would not have an obligation to, I would say legally, they would not have an obligation to provide those because this is for students who had IEPs prior to the pandemic or during the pandemic. And so, but to answer your initial question about can my child receive services in the summer, the answer is yes to that in all actuality, yes, there is a possibility of that. In that, not for the COVID-19 impact services, but if there has been, or if there was regression at some time during the year that you've documented, and or if the child is not going to recoup, it will not be able to get back what they've learned at the beginning of the school year, but you need to have documented that already.
Thank you. The following question. My son has social and language issues, and they just let my son go for 1 day for extended school year, which I think is not enough to for his social. Even I have data to show he has regressed over the break. Any recommendations?
Contact our office and let us look at some documents. It's so hard. I mean, that's what I recommend.
Okay, another question.
And Maria, before
Yes.
we do the last question, I'm going to send out the questionnaire again. So I'd like everyone to take the questionnaire again so that we can see what you have learned in the presentation. It shouldn't take you very long. It's the same questionnaire as before. You just have to remember your code that you put in the first time around. I will get the, actually, Dr. Hill, can you put the ACDD survey in the chat box as well, since I'm sharing my screen? So if everyone can fill these out, and then we'll put another one in the chat in just a second.
Thank you, Dr. Drew. So we have a couple of more questions. One of them says, during the closing of the schools, my son did not regress. However, he did not attain his IEP goals. Okay, he did not reach the IEP goals. Is this enough so that for him to qualify for ESY?
Okay, so these are not extended school year services. This COVID-19 impact services are different from extended school year services. As a matter of fact, theoretically speaking, a child could get ESY and also get COVID-19 impact services. They're two different things. So I feel like this person's question may have been assuming that these were the same. If you don't mind, Maria, will you repeat the question, and I'll try to answer what they're looking for the answer to be. I mean, not what I'll try to answer what they're trying to ask, what I feel like they're trying to ask.
Okay, yes. So during the closing of the schools, my son did not regress. However, he didn't achieve any goals. Is this enough for him to qualify for ESY?
Okay, so a child not reaching their goals in an IEP is not necessarily enough for ESY, but it can be enough for ESY. That is the goal, is for them to reach their goal. I would request an impact review, and I would also request ESY to be considered for ESY. And I would make that request to the special education coordinator, copy the principal, and if we got some documents, some documentation, I'd be happy to help there, or to do an intake anyway in our office to see about helping that parent.
Thank you. Now, this is a question in regards of a previous one. So if vocational rehabilitation is not able to attend the IEP meeting, should we go ahead and still discuss transition without them present, or should we leave that for another time? Is this a legal burden?
So they did, a vocational rehabilitation representative does not have to be in the IEP meeting. However, if you want them in an IEP meeting and they cannot attend, you can rearrange the schedule. You can request an IEP meeting when they can come in. So you can come back and address those things, but yes, you can have an IEP meeting and address transition without a VR representative, a transition representative from VR there.
Just to clarify, I think that this was more in relationship with the school letting the parent know that vocational rehabilitation services were not appropriate until the child was in the 11th grade, and the parent had wanted VR to come, but they're saying that they're not able to attend. So but they could still address.
I would postpone that IEP. If you want that individual, if you want that VR representative there and you feel like they need to be there, I would postpone that IEP meeting until they can be there.
Mm-hmm. And so far, those are all the questions. I don't know if anybody else wants to put their questions in the chat box. Oh, thank you, Ms. Wendy.
Thank you.
This is Dana. Can I just ask one myself?
Yes.
So I feel like a lot of families that we've heard from have reported that during COVID, when their child was learning virtually, or perhaps in the fall, remote learning, that it was their first opportunity to really see what their child was or was not learning. And what they realized is that their child's program perhaps wasn't what they thought it should be. Not as a result of COVID. It was that way before. This was just the first time that the parents were really able to see what was going on. So can you address, what those parents should do, both in regard to the COVID recovery or COVID impact services, but also just generally how they should try to improve their child's situation?
Well, I'm going to say education, empowering themselves by learning what should be in there, but I'm afraid I'm not giving you enough. I think for those also requesting that impact review. But yeah, I'm not sure exactly what you're looking for, Dana. Certainly empowering the parents that becoming empowered to be able to advocate on behalf of their child, whereas before, they didn't know how much they had to work for their child to get what they needed. But certainly looking at the impact review services as a potential, you may want to word something a little different.
It's probably to give you a call or to talk to APEC as well for some training. That was a hard one. I apologize. So my second one, maybe this one is easier, maybe not. What about community-based instruction specifically? Students who missed out on that, understandably, last year because it wasn't safe to go out in the community. Can you share what that may look like as far as that being included in the COVID services?
Well, again, individualized, but if your child did not receive those services and they were supposed to, then I would say addressing that, it would likely be appropriate to address it in ESY as well as COVID-19 impact services. But keep in mind that those services are for now, for the summer, for next year, whenever the IEP team says that those services are to be provided. And I would imagine that, and I don't, this is brand new, but I would imagine that if you write this plan whereby these COVID-19 services are going to be provided, and then you've written them for X amount of time, and then the student is still not where they would have been had the pandemic not happened, I would imagine then, and there's nothing that I've seen from the State Department, but that the IEP team could come back together and continue to address those impact services. I think that's most appropriate.
So there's not a date necessarily by which the impact services will stop being provided.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
And
Thank you.
I'm
sorry.
Sorry, Maria, real quick. The impact reviews, could you share with the parents what that will look like? Are there certain forms that will be filled out? Is it an IEP meeting with the impact in it? I guess I'm just so that the parents have an idea of what that looks like.
Right.
And before you answer that, Ms. Wendy, because probably that is kind of tied up to this other question, is should the parent make a request in writing requesting that impact services?
Always.
Thank you.
Always, always. I say put everything in writing, document everything. And I've talked to parents who said, well, I just met so-and-so in the hall. I know you told me to do that, but I met him in the hall and now can you help me? You know, and I'm just like, you know what, there is a reason that I tell you to put it in writing, and it's the best way to do it. It's proven to work, proven to be most effective. Now, Dr. Drew, to answer you, I have not been in an IEP meeting yet. I will be today, whereby these services will be addressed. I have colleagues who have been in these meetings. What I envision is I don't imagine that Alabama went out and did these fancy forms that are just for COVID-19 impact services. So I imagine they're going to just be addressed in the IEP document as a separate, or maybe somewhere in between sometime. And I think it's going to be different in every single school district, because when you do an addendum to an IEP, it's different in every school district. Sometimes they put little asterisks to say, this is an addendum. Sometimes they write a new IEP that completely, totally readdresses, but they call it an addendum. So I'm not certain, but I feel, based on my experience, I feel like it's just going to be kind of thrown into the IEP, which is fine. I mean, it's still a legally binding document, and for some parents that keeps it all right there together. So
Thank you.
Thank you. I think those are all the questions. I feel that those were very important and relevant questions. I really appreciate all the parents and professionals that are presenting these questions from Ms. Wendy. So Dr. Drew, Dr. Hill, or anybody else have any other questions or comments?
And before we wrap up, I did put these surveys, which are separate, into the chat. So the surveys go to ACDD, who are our funders. So they're the reason that we can have these meetings with the interpreters. They're providing the support for that. So if everyone can fill that out, it's very short. It's just saying, basically, how did you like the presentation? It's not like our questionnaire where you have to answer questions about the content. So it's just kind of how do you feel about the presentation? Would you go to another one like it? Kind of stuff like that. So we have it in Spanish, we have it in English, and we have it in Korean. So if you click on the link, you should be able to find it in that language. And I sent it just at about 10 minutes ago. And actually, I'll just resend it in case people were out of the meeting. And so that will help us to show ACDD that we are being a good steward of the funds, and that, that this is having an impact on our participants' lives.
Thank you, Dr. Drew. I just wanted to say that while we had Spanish interpreters today, and the focus of the grant is for Hispanic outreach for families with children with disabilities. So, but we have added Korean interpreters to our sessions. And but this month, we were not able to secure the Korean interpreters. So what we are going to do is send the recording and have subtitles put on it in Korean. So if you are a Korean speaking family member, you will have access to that and at a later time when we send it out. And also we will do this presentation again on Friday at 6 p.m. because a lot of families can't come during the day because they're working. And if we can possibly get our Korean interpreters by Friday, we will have them there. We are very thankful to Alabama Council on Developmental Disabilities for awarding us this grant. We want to thank Wendy Dean. I think she did an awesome job. Cut my hands. Yeah. So we appreciate you coming. And I know it was kind of like you got fired a lot of questions and you handled them with grace, and answered them the best you could. And then for families, if you have questions, that 800 number, please give ADAP a call. ADAP is the reason we get these impact services, because they advocate for our families and they take their data from your calls and they say to the State Department, this is needed and this is what needs to happen. So let me see. Yeah, and thank you to our Marias, Maria Sahanic and Maria Baker for interpreting today. It makes it all the difference in the world. So I'm done.
Well, I just want to say that to all of our parents, I really appreciate that you guys are taking the time to learn about all this new material, to be the best advocate for your student. So thank you, and thank you to Ms. Wendy Dean for taking time from her busy schedule to come and present about this very important topic. And Dr. Drew, is there anything else?
That's it. I'm going to stop the recording.